Hey class, welcome back to World History 2. I hope you're all doing well today. Last time we looked at part 1 of the interwar years, and we're going to continue and finish our look at the interwar years, part 2. Stay tuned for the PowerPoint.
This intro slide, I didn't talk about this last time, but this intro slide, my son made this up for me, a collage of different images from the 20s. So we want beer, so that's prohibition. You have a guy down here who's pouring alcohol. You know, these guys down here, obviously illegal alcohol into these canisters. This is at a speakeasy where you have the lady dancing. She was called a flapper. This is the dance style. Was called, they were called flapping. They were called flappers. Some guys that are unemployed up here. So lost all in the stock market. $100 will buy this car. So during the Great Depression, some people around the radio. This will be later on. The radio became more and more important during this time period. Okay, so interwar period. Today we're going to be talking about post-war treaties and then the rise of Mussolini. Post-war treaties, the Locarno Pact was signed in London on December 1st, 1925. It was 7 agreements negotiated in Locarno, Switzerland. And basically what it was the Allies who won World War I and the new states in Europe attempted to negotiate some things. They attempted to negotiate some territorial settlements, especially between the borders of Germany with France and with Poland. So remember Germany, that map I showed you last lecture, France is on the western side of Germany, and the borders that were going to be basically reestablished there. And then with Poland, now Poland is a new country, and so where is it that the border of Germany and Poland is going to be, which would be a sticking point for Hitler? I mean, obviously, the beginning of World War II is 1939 when Hitler invades Poland. They also negotiate relations of defeated peoples, especially Weimar Germany. So just the relations between countries. One of the statements that occurs in the Locarno Pact, which Germany does sign because they do want some entry into the League of Nations, so they do sign this, is that Germany would never go to war again, which is I found that interesting because not too long after this, Germany will go to war again. So it's interesting that this Locarno Pact says that. Germany was promised entry into the League of Nations, and this is known as the Spirit of Locarno. The Treaty of Versailles set out to punish Germany. The War Guilt Clause, the high war reparations, the Allies wanted to punish Germany. But under the Locarno Act, there's this Spirit of Locarno, which is kind of like an olive branch given out to Germany. Like we want to have peace. We want to have a spirit of almost of mercy to you. And for if you agree to these things, we will allow you into the League of Nations, and so they do. So they signed this that they would not go to war again. Obviously, Hitler would renounce this treaty in 1936, and the way he renounces it is the remilitarization of the Rhineland. So remember, at the end of World War I, the German military could not be in the Rhineland, which was a border area with France. And in 1936, Hitler invades the Rhineland with his military. Now, the Rhineland is still Germany, but he brings his military into the Rhineland. Now, there had not been military in the Rhineland for a long time. In 1936, there had not been any military in the Rhineland since the end of World War I. So this action by Hitler is very provocative to the French and to the British and all. They're like, the military is not supposed to be in there, and you just sent them in. So Hitler renounces this treaty. The second one we're going to talk about is the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. This was an international peace treaty negotiated between the United States and the French. And basically, it was the U.S. Secretary of State Frank Kellogg and French Foreign Minister Aristide Briand. And they have this pact. They renounce war as a way of settling disputes. And what happens is, the reason that this is international is not just because it was the United States and French, but almost every world government joined up with this pact, and they signed this pact. and it was to maintain and guarantee peace around the world. Okay, but again, all these treaties, they always fail. It was signed by Germany, but 11 years later, World War II is going to begin. So it doesn't matter what man does, treaties they come up with, sign these pacts, whatever. It's always going to devolve into some kind of a crisis and then war. Okay, we're going to talk about Italy now, which is going to set us up for Mussolini at the end of this PowerPoint lecture. But post-war Italy, switching sides. What happens is World War I begins, and Italy doesn't really know what to do. They're not sure who to align with. And so at first, they basically nominally are allied with the Central Powers. They don't do too much. They're not like on the front lines fighting with Germany or anything. They're down there. They've kind of aligned themselves with Germany, with Austro-Hungary, but they're not doing too much. And the reason that they're allied with them is that in 1882 they signed an alliance with Germany and Austro-Hungarian empires. But when World War I begins, they start kind of weighing their options, and they want to see what both sides can offer. And they're going to line up with the one that they believe what side can offer the most to them. And so they actually ally themselves in 1915. They switch sides, and they ally themselves with the Allies. Okay? And now, again, they don't do too much in World War I. There is the Italian front of World War I, which is basically mountain warfare. They're fighting in the Alps, down there in the Italian Alps. But it's not a huge area for World War I. The way they do this in 1915, they secretly sign the Treaty of London, and they switch over and join up with the Triple Entente. Now, Italy had hoped for territorial gains after the war, that they would, they ally themselves with the winners, and they're going to get something, but really they get very little. And so what happens is the peasants and the workers, who were basically the soldiers for the Italians in World War I, they expected more, and they didn't get it. So what happens is they create the Communist Party of Italy. Now, the Communist Party of Italy also doesn't really pan out for anybody and doesn't give what they promise. And they only existed from 1921 to 1926. And the reason being is that with the rise of Mussolini, more and more people are disenfranchised by the Communist Party in Italy, and they lean more and more towards the fascist government, which is established in Italy, and many people join the fascist side of things, and they end up the Communist Party ends up going out of any kind of existence by 1926 because of the fascist government making communism illegal. So we're going to talk here about fascism. Fascism, I have a definition here, they're highlighted in yellow, a form of government with a one-party dictatorship. This government is usually accompanied by a military government with the leader or dictator as the head of the military. Please do not confuse fascism and communism. Fascism and communism are not the same, which we're going to see here coming up. Fascism is characterized by strong nationalism. Okay, communism is, by definition, communism is not for strong nationalism. Okay, therefore, strong people movement. Fascism is extreme authoritarianism. Okay, a dictator in charge. Again, socialism is not that way. It's more of the people rule, not a dictator rule. And then, obviously, fascism, because of what I just said, is known for hostilities toward liberals and Marxists or communists. And what you do is you have to look at it on a spectrum, where you have the center of a spectrum, and on the far right is going to be the fascists, and on the far left is going to be the Marxists. And so you have the right wing and the left wing. Now, the far right, which are going to be the fascists, they're the ones that will be aligned with a dictator, authoritarian rule, strong national identity. This will be Mussolini. This is going to be Hitler. This will be the Emperor of Japan. These are fascist governments. On the far side, on the left, or the left wing, is the communists, and they're going to be more aligned with rights of the people rule, the people control the wealth, the people control the production, the government, all of that. And so if you don't want to go as far left as communist, then you go just a little bit left, and that's more of like the socialist. And then you have the center of the scale, and then you start getting more to the right. And we kind of have the same, where do we fit in our country with a democracy, which we're a republic, but we have a democratic government. We're more kind of in the center. And so you have the right wing and the left wing of in the United States. And so if you look at the center of a scale, and you look at like neo-Nazis are going to be far right radicals. But then if you look at the communists in our country, they're going to be on the far left. Okay, so it's like where do you fall on this spectrum? Well, in Europe, that many of the, especially leading up to World War II, you're going to have many going towards the far right. The Nazis are far right. Fascist Italy is far right, compared to communism, which is far left. And so here's some differences. Fascism and communism differences. Fascism does not seek state ownership of means of production. Okay, that's what communism says, that the state owns production. It goes out to the people, all about equality and economic equality and all of that, anti-capitalist, all of that. No. Fascism does not seek any of that. Fascism does not seek economic equality. They don't care about state-owned production. They want more of a capitalistic production. So, for example, in Nazi Germany, who did they rely on? They relied on Krupp, K-R-U-P-P. Krupp production, they produced so much of the armaments. They relied on Mercedes, Benz. They relied on Volkswagen. These are corporations that funded and produced the war machine for Nazi Germany. It wasn't the Nazi government producing this war machine. It was companies producing the war machine. So fascism, they really aren't concerned about economic equality. They're concerned about income through capitalism. Fascism is very nationalistic. Okay, communism is not. Communism is not nationalistic, where you have this national identity. Where again, in fascist Nazi Germany, they align themselves with being Nazis and Nazi Germans. Okay, communism is not like that. Interwar fascist states, Italy, 1922 to 43, with dictator Benito Mussolini. Germany was obviously 33 to 45, the Third Reich, and that was Adolf Hitler. Japan was the emperor there in Japan. Austria. Now, Austria was a fascist state at first, but then they were, because they were very loyal to Germany. But they were annexed in 1938. It's called the Anschluss. They were annexed in 1938, which caused a lot of problems with the other European powers, mainly Great Britain. And Austria formally became part of the Third Reich in 1938. Okay, so Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945. His early life, his dad was Alessandro Mussolini. He was a blacksmith and a socialist. His mom, Rosa, was a Catholic school teacher. Benito worked as a teacher and a journalist. But then when World War I came around, he fought in World War I for the Italian army. He was wounded in action. He returned from the war and became a journalist for the remainder of the war. And he was a strong nationalist. So right there, he's going to start, ideologically, he's going to start lining up with the far right, being a strong nationalist. And he opposed anyone that was anti-nationalistic. So who is anti-nationalistic? The communists. They're going to be anti-nationalistic. And so after the war, he formed the Fascist Party in Italy. which was a strong right-wing nationalist party. And one thing they did was they wore black shirts. For some reason, during this time, political parties would have almost kind of like uniforms, and they wore black shirts. Hitler, it was the brown shirts, which was called the SA. They wore brown shirts. So very nationalistic, very right-wing. Many times they were armed. They would definitely, they wouldn't go out there unarmed. When they would go confront communists, they would be armed. And so the right-wing fascist party would commit terrorist attacks on communists. They would intimidate anyone that was like leaning communist, making sure that they would not do any kind of communist activity. So it was definitely right-wing against left-wing, the fascists against the communists, and Benito Mussolini being the fascist leader. Here's some pictures. Mussolini in the early 1900s. Here he is as a World War I soldier and then dictator in 1930. And the reason we're talking about Mussolini and Italy before we get into Germany is because Mussolini came to power before Hitler. So by the time Hitler comes to power in 1933, Mussolini had already been dictator for a while in Italy. So Italy was already a fascist state established. They ended up getting in trouble in North Africa and with their expansion. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. But Mussolini, he's out doing his thing. He's a fascist dictator. So his rise to power, again, he had the black shirts were the fascist group. And what they did was they formed into bands of thugs within the country, in cities and in towns. They would form bands of thugs that would go around and beat up and terrorize the communists. These thugs were mostly discontented veterans of World War I. Again, they didn't get what they thought they were going to get after the war ended, and so they were discontented veterans that had that camaraderie and had that kind of organization, and they came together. And this is the exact same thing takes place in Germany, but here in Italy it happens, and they're strong supporters of Mussolini, who are fascists, who's a fascist, and so these black shirts become very, very powerful. They were champions of law and order, and so any kind of communist rebellion, and again, communism is kind of like, I don't want to say they're not law-abiding, but if the nation is the nation of laws and people are very nationalistic, and those nationalistic people are more on the right, then the law and order is going to be protected by those on the right, and those on the left aren't going to be concerned too much about law and order. These guys would violently attack communists, socialists, radicals, and progressives. There's an event that takes place in 1922 called the Black Shirt March of 1922, where 200,000 black shirts marched on Rome, and this is actually what brings Mussolini to power and begins the fascist rule in Italy. The Black Shirt March of 1922, there's a picture there of Mussolini. This is Mussolini here. I'll bring that cursor right here. I'm circling his head. That's Mussolini. And this is a picture of the Black Shirt March of 1922. When the 200,000 march into Rome, the government in Rome is scared, and so they resign. And Mussolini basically allows for changes of government underneath of the king. And so basically, constitutionally, this just looks like a change in government. The government that's there is gone, is dissolved, and a new government is established. And so really, it's not a conquest of power. It's more of just a change of government. And Mussolini was made prime minister under the King of Italy. But it's still what takes place. King Victor Emmanuel III makes Mussolini the prime minister. So constitutionally, no real conquest of power. But what happens is, constitutionally, the prime minister, who is now Mussolini, has the ability to have dictatorial powers for up to a year and create a new government. And that's exactly what he does. He creates a new government, a fascist government. So here's a picture of Mussolini in Rome after the Black Shirt March of 1922. So these guys here, again, they're wearing their medals. These medals would have been from World War I. very kind of militaristic kind of a thing. And now you have Mussolini here in the center of the picture. So very militaristic. Here's a picture of Mussolini standing on the balcony after his takeover, fascist takeover, again, wearing the military uniform. Okay, so under his rule, the Lateran Agreement of 1929 takes place, and this is where the Vatican is recognized as an independent state within Italy, and that's a 109-acre sovereign territory that belongs to the Catholic Church. It doesn't belong to Italy, it belongs to the Catholic Church. And what happens is, in this agreement, Article number 20 says that in return for this established sovereign Roman Catholic Vatican state, all the bishops would be loyal to the Italian state, which is fascist. And this will be very important during World War II when the Pope gives his backing to Hitler. There's also the bachelor's tax of 1927. And this tax is kind of interesting. It's a tax based on their race, so it affected basically pure Italians. And it doesn't, when I say race, it doesn't get as bad as like the Jews in Germany or anything like that, the Aryan race in Germany. It doesn't get to that extreme because really Mussolini didn't do much with Jews at all until the war starts and pressure from the Nazis to start deporting their Jews. But it was race based that the Italians, who were pure-blooded Italian men, would be taxed if they did not marry pure-blooded Italian women. And what this was for was to obviously to propagate the pure Italian race, but also it was to produce children who would become soldiers. So, and Hitler did the same thing. But this bachelor's tax would force a tax on unmarried men. And so really what it was an incentive to these men to get married and have children. By 1936, the tax was over half of a tax of the taxes that a bachelor paid. So at the end of the year, if you looked at how much tax a bachelor had paid, half of those taxes would be the bachelor tax. Role of Italian women. Women were very important to the Italians and to the Germans during this time, this interwar years that was going to lead up to World War II. Women were looked at as very important. They were given respect. Okay, when I'm talking about this here today, and obviously with the Germans too, don't think that women were not respected, because this was a different time. More women. It was more traditional with families, so women would be at home. Women would be mothers, having children, all of that. Men would be more in the workplace. So don't think that it's a disrespect. The Italians and the Germans had great respect for women. Their ideal women were submissive wives and strong mothers. The ideal women would be happy to raise large families, and they were holder of traditional family values. And again, many, many women in these countries, that's what they did, and they were happy doing it. It wasn't like they were forced to do it. They were happy doing it. This is what they believed that their role in their society was to be, good wives, good mothers, raise children, all of that. In fact, many of these women in the country, and I'm talking about countrywide movements, they would be given awards and incentives and all kinds of things for being mothers. In Germany, definitely. Hitler, the wives and mothers in Hitler's Germany, would be given these medals that they would wear out in public to show that, I am one of the women who are supporting the government and supporting our leader and all of that. So basically what happens is girls were taught from an early age, and also in Italian youth groups, to focus on attaining this ideal. For the role of women. Now, we'll talk about the youth groups later, especially with the Hitler Youth, which was the Hitler Jugend was the name of the Hitler Youth, which was compulsory youth group attendance. Well, it's the same thing in Italy, and actually first in Italy, where they had these youth groups. Now, don't think youth group like church youth group. They definitely had a different idea for their youth group. But they focused on basically indoctrinating their children to believing this so that when the children grew up, they would follow the government's lead. And so these girls would be indoctrinated to grow up to be submissive wives, to get married, and to have children. Obviously, the whole purpose of this is to produce children for the government, to the government's disposal, that they could have big militaries, have strong nations through their military. Mussolini believed that a strong peasant farming woman was the best mother. And again, that was the same thing with Hitler. It was this idea of being, of the earth, of the land, of the farm. The strong mother that's out there taking care of the children and planting with her husband and harvesting. This was the ideal. That's what Hitler did too. The marriage loan incentive was a government incentive for couples to marry, and when the couples married, the loan would then be given to them to help them out to establish a home, to buy a house, to buy land, to establish a family. And the reason I put this underneath the role of Italian women was that if, that's supposed to say if down there as a typo, it's not ID, it's if, I-F, id. No, if a woman had 4 or more children, the loan was forgiven. So, the good Italian woman who would go and get married, and then the good Italian wife would go produce children, and then their loan was forgiven. So that money was basically free, quote unquote free, after having children. Here's a picture of some boys of an Italian fascist youth group. And, look at these kids. These are young. These are definitely like maybe older elementary age, maybe 4th grade. 5th grade, third, 4th, 5th grade maybe. They're armed. They have guns. Now these guns would probably be a small arm, probably like maybe a 22 caliber, not a very heavy arm. It's not like they're out there shooting like heavy weapons, but just so they can go out there. It's kind of like militarized Boy Scouts. They have uniforms. They have this is their bedroll around their arm. They have a belt on with probably cartridges inside this belt. Here's their weapon. They have this headgear on. They're having fun. They belong. Their camaraderie. It's kind of like the Boy Scouts, but here they're armed. Hitler did the exact same thing. Here's a group, a photograph of girls of the Littorio fascist youth group. This photo is dated 1936, so later on, so pre-World War II. But notice the age. Maybe 13, 14 years old. So these girls in 3-4 years, they're going to be coming around the time of marriage, and they've been indoctrinated to produce children. So they'll go and get married to a young man who is probably a young man who grew up in one of these. So this young man's indoctrinated in the youth group, and the young lady is indoctrinated in the youth group, and they know their role in society, and so they're going to go out there and they're going to get married and produce children, so that those children would then grow up to be loyal soldiers for the nation. Now, of course, that plan would not come to fruition to where they would grow, that these women would have children to grow up to be soldiers, because if they got married in 1940 and had children, obviously the war would end by 1945, and these nations would collapse. The idea is there to produce these large militaries and all of that, but it never really comes to fruition because the war would end in 1945. Notice on the back here on the wall, it says Duce, D-U-C-E. It means the leader. Okay, so that's it for the war interwar period.
All right, class, that's it for today. Next time, we're going to be looking at Rise of the Nazis, Part 1. I'll see you then.